over to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. Allan Adler, managing partner from Digital Bridge Partners and developers of the Ecosystem movement and community. And it's my pleasure to be here with the Pandium leadership. And over to you, Cristina and Kelly, to make some quick introductions.
Excellent. Nice to meet some of you and see some of you again. My name is Cristina Flaschen. I'm the CEO at Pandium and also the co-founder of the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance, and really excited to chat with everyone today. What about you, Kel?
I lead market at Pandium, which is an integration marketplace platform as a service that is a tool designed to accelerate technology partnerships. And as Cristina mentioned, that we also co-founded the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance, which is a group for people who are building tech ecosystems. So if you're not a member, please check it out.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully everyone can see my slides here. We're super excited about today's presentation because we believe that, well, I personally believe that the product organization is the real keystone to unlocking the potential of the ecosystem. One thing for marketing and sales and customer success to get it, but at the end of the day, we're SaaS companies, we're technology companies. We lead with what we put into the engine that essentially is our automation. And our belief is that when the product organization is fully aligned with the ecosystem framework, that magic happens. So today we're going to talk a little bit about SaaS being in a little trouble, and that product organizations, in our view, are kind of the unwitting culprits. We call them unwitting because they're not trying to put SaaS into trouble, but because of the way that product organizations are approaching challenges in the SaaS marketplace, we believe that there's a challenge, but with every challenge, there's an opportunity. In our Ecosystem framework, which is a comprehensive guide for the C-suite to maximize the potential of the ecosystem, we have a new concept for a roadmap that we'd like to talk to the product team about, which is a new way to think about products and ecosystems thought more in a more harmonious and integrated way. And maybe Kelly and Cristina, you could tell us a little bit about how we're going to make all this happen.
Yeah, so at the end, we'll cover the best practices, tips, and tricks on how tactically to actually implement some of the things that Allan is talking about to make sure that your partner ecosystem is a success.
Fantastic. Okay, and again, please let us know in the chat if you have any ideas or what is that nonsense. Please come back to that and tell us what you're talking about. We'd be happy to do that and make this as interactive and fun as possible. Okay, so why is SaaS in trouble? Well, first of all, SaaS is doing great. It's exploding, right? You know, my buddy Jay talks about there being 1 million B2B SaaS companies by 2028. And there's 175,000 of them now. So SaaS looks like it's doing pretty good. But if you think about the history of SaaS, which essentially was born out of the invention of the complex suite that you saw with Oracles and SAP, SaaS is this kind of best of breed phenomenon. And so it's not a surprise when you look at how fragmented SaaS is that there's quite a bit of churn happening across our customers. And not only that, but a lot of the licenses that customers buy aren't necessarily used. So one could argue that the, perception of value of SaaS across the board at the average enterprise is not super high. And a lot of that's because of integration. And in our view, integration is sort of this central driver of success, and poor integrations ultimately lead to churn. So if the SaaS market's going to grow, right, it's up to us, the CEOs and C-suite of these SaaS companies, to figure out how to create end-to-end solutions and to align the ecosystem interoperably. I posted something in LinkedIn yesterday that was from the CDP survey. It said that the number 1 and 2 most important factors in driving whether or not MarTech solutions are bought are internal and external integrations. So if we haven't already come to the conclusions that integrations are the key, and that if we don't get it right, we're not going to see SaaS growth. That's a central pillar to our perspectives here. So this is really the sort of reason that we believe product companies need to really pay attention here, because it's not going to happen through backhanded integrations that occur on the back. It's going to have to be through something much more strategic. So in our view, in order for this to all work, we in the product organizations need to think ecosystematically. What does that mean? Well, we have these market imperatives, right? Where, IDC, for example, says that, by 2026, 25% of all corp dev, all dev will happen in the ecosystem. So we've got to figure out how to engage this ecosystem to co-innovate with us to create these joint solutions. And once we do that, we have to figure out how to synchronize that co-innovation with the influence the ecosystem provides, with the selling the ecosystem is going to do with us, and the value realization. And it's this lack of synchronization that really explains why product organizations don't have a more substantive and foundational understanding for how partnerships and ecosystems really do monetize and help the product ultimately win. And of course, if we get all that stuff right, we're going to create these big network effects that align across the customer value, and that's going to lead to faster growth and higher profitability. So this ecosystem mindset is really key. Anything to add to that, Cristina or Kelly, from the perspective of the product organization seeing the ecosystem? I mean, one thing I'll add is that you guys started a whole community around this. So I'd love your perspectives on how you're seeing the ecosystem and the product organizations kind of coming together in that regard.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in with an example that's kind of top of mind because it just happened. I think that there's a company that called Fast, which is a one-click checkout. And there's another company called Bolt, which does the same thing. And in the last year, Fast had raised 120 million. They were backed by Stripe, but they really didn't invest in these strategic product partnerships. They sort of had an add-on through the code to templates for BigCommerce, but they didn't have a partnership with them, while Bolt has really developed these strategic partnerships with BigCommerce, with Adobe, with Salesforce Commerce Cloud. And they're worth multi-billions of dollars, while Fast was not able to really get customer adoption. And I think it's really a powerful recent example of two companies that probably have a somewhat similar functionality in their core product, but one who chose to integrate with those existing systems and really adopt this framework that you're talking about. And then another one that said, I'm just going to go direct to the merchants and tell them just use us, and we don't have a strong relationship with these other products that you're using. And it failed. So I'm sure there's other factors going on, but I do think it's a good example of how you can become a multi-billions of dollars company, or you can end up going under if you're not pursuing this strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. We wrote an article a couple of months ago called Ecosystem Solution Fit, How Product Market Fit No Longer Fits. And I think it kind of like talking a little bit about that, right? That, we think we get to product market fit and then we're good to go, right? But if you don't have the ecosystem lined up behind that product market fit, hence an ecosystem solution fit, probably are going to end up holding the bag, so to speak. So I think this is a great topic because product market fit has always been this product market fit and go to market strategy are like, are like orange juice and bacon at breakfast. Right? That's what you get when you go to breakfast, right? So now we're kind of saying maybe the ecosystem is going to be in breakfast somehow. I don't know, go to ecosystem, something like that. Okay, cool. So now that we know the ecosystem mindset is critical, let's contrast go to market and bacon to go to ecosystem. So when we think about go to market, this, by the way, this term's been around since, I don't know, we invented when we invented currency, when we back 10,000 years ago, or whenever it was, right? We products were basically built in-house. And if there was an integration, it wasn't very good, or it was thought of as being a secondary thing. Oh, customers screaming about integration, go to the integration. Lines of business were not aligned to the market, sell or support products. In other words, the LOBs were focusing mostly on the product, but not on the partners and not on the integrations. And product partner motions tended to be ad hoc and fragmented and unproductive. So that's kind of the go-to-market model. The go-to-ecosystem model is really all about creating a much more robust connection between the product and the ecosystem. We're going to talk about this concept of roadmaps. The products that we deliver become end-to-end solutions where instead of the ecosystem being this bolted add-on, it's actually thought of in an end-to-end solution model. So when marketing gets the task to go to market with that product and ecosystem roadmap, they start by saying, okay, what's the end-to-end solution, including the partners? And then no surprise, sales gets enabled because sales is going to be enabled on the solutions that marketing has, and customer success behavior is making sure the entire end-to-end solution works. So that's what the whole concept of this end-to-end solution. And finally, the partner motions are orchestrated, integrated, and profitable. So that's sort of the difference between go to ecosystem and go to market fundamentally. tighter connection to the integrations, lines of business aligned to end-to-end solutions, and partner motions being integrated and orchestrated rather than treated as an ad hoc. Any comments on that from the perspective of you've seen the sea change over the last few years, going from go-to-market to more of an ecosystem approach?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think this really speaks to the evolution of SaaS as a whole. If you look even 10 years ago, definitely 15 or 20 years ago, software was all about being a monolith, right? It was every feature that your customer wants, you need to build, you need to own. And what we've seen is that doesn't work well because customers want lots of features, and a proliferation of point solutions. So someone really good at payment processing, really good at help desk ticketing. And that has changed the landscape of SaaS generally and caused sort of the go-to-market to switch to go to ecosystem, like really focus on what you're good at, be very, very strategic about what your North Star is as a business, and then find the best in breed folks that your customers use to create that composable tech stack for their business and partner instead of trying to be all things to all people.
Brilliant, brilliant. Awesome. So when we start to think about the beginning of this journey, if we're running a product organization, engineering resources, you have a product roadmap. The product roadmap is sort of like another, key breakfast item, right? Along with go-to-market, product market fit, and product roadmap. I mean, now breakfast is served, right? So the product roadmap has always been this sort of like North Star orchestration device that determines what gets done, when it gets done, how much gets spent, who does what, where does it happen. But to your point, Cristina, the product roadmap existed in isolation, much in the same way as go-to-market was an isolated motion. We made the product, so what goes into our product? And if you try to insert an ecosystem member into the product roadmap, it doesn't work because it's not called the product and ecosystem roadmap, it's called the product roadmap. So we believe that the next paradigm shift is an actual change of the planning motion from product roadmap to product and ecosystem roadmap. And what's key critical to that process is determining a way to segment your partners. So some partners are going to be really strategic. In the old days when Salesforce started out, they invented SaaS, right? Or invented B2B SaaS, they said, we're going to have to find out those critical partners that we need to complete our solution. And those are probably going to be strategic. Even if they're small, they're still strategic. They always get sold. And then you have complementary partners and partners that extend your solution. But ultimately, everyone needs to come up with a segmentation. And isn't it cool if your ecosystem leader or your partner leader has the same segmentation for their program? Because then the way the product roadmap is segmented according to partner types is complemented by the programmatic approach that the partnership team uses to go to ecosystem. So what's been your experience, Kelly and Cristina, as you've seen companies try to insert the ecosystem more into the formality of the roadmap?
Yeah, I think, and this illustration kind of nails down how you are now working with people outside of your business organization to develop your product roadmap. And that is something that you need to maintain alignment on, and you need to put processes in place where you're not just internally developing your roadmap. Your strategic partners are very evolved. So we see, product leaders at one organization regularly meeting with product leaders at the other organization to share knowledge about their shared customer, right? And then how you can continue to develop your tools in tandem, so you're both meeting the needs of your shared customer, and that's sort of a win-win-win. And so I think that's a very different model and something people need to adjust to. This is sort of premises on trust, but also these relationships where you have someone outside of your organization that is really key to informing your own product roadmap. And it's not just your APIs layer, it's not just that interoperable layer, but also what your product itself does and sort of what it is filling and what needs it's meeting for the customer.
Brilliant. Cristina, thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I totally agree with Kelly. I think that's a pretty hard shift when you're seeing product organizations collaborating about their own products to try to fill gaps where they feel like they can be valuable to customers versus, Allan, to your point, sort of creating this roadmap in a vacuum, maybe listening to customer support feedback, maybe listening to some sales feedback. It definitely feels like it's a more community-based exercise now.
Brilliant. One of the things that you said that I really resonated with is that when you think about product roadmap, it's just you. And if somebody else has a product roadmap, you don't really care because it's not them. It's them, not you. This becomes a we. as we over here. Because if I have a product roadmap that includes the ecosystem, then somebody who is in my sphere actually looks like this, except their product is in the middle and I'm on the outside. So, or in one of these layers. So that concept of we that you mentioned, Kelly, I think is really important. We have a product ecosystem roadmap with our ecosystem partners, and they have a product ecosystem roadmap with us. So it's no longer this sort of like living in isolation. We're constantly iterating, as you point out. And it's got to be living on both sides. Otherwise, it's a static and not a dynamic process. Okay, so for those of you who've tuned into the Go-To Ecosystem framework, we say so much about it that by now you must have heard about it. There's 4 steps to this framework, and taken as a whole, it starts with the notion that we've got to transform. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, ecosystems are thought of as being things that a company does to get something else done, rather than a source of competitive advantage or a source of transformation. But in our view, if you want to get ecosystem right, it's got to begin with your CEO and your C-suites, this transformation. Then there's these 3 parts: building an ecosystem platform strategy. That's how we move from selling products to building platforms on which other people develop. And that's a whole exercise in and of itself between the product organization and the product organization. There's aligning the lines of business, which again is the ecosystem lead, making sure that all the lines of business are working copacetically with each of the partner segments in such a way that it's seamless and integrated rather than ad hoc and fragmented. And finally, then the orchestration of the ecosystem, the outside ring. But in our view, the product organization plays a role in all 3 of these. But because each of these are quite distinct, we're going to spend most of our time talking about this line of business alignment and what it looks like when a product organization adopts the roadmap we talked about, and how that cascades to marketing, sales, and customer success, and why that leads to the fastest way to drive growth and profitability. So let's talk a little bit about the alignment process. So ideally, in our view, the chief ecosystem officer is working closely with the product lead to start alignment at the product level. Unfortunately, this doesn't always happen. Most of the time, product ecosystem chief or the partner officer is pulling an integration in an ad hoc way because product's not properly aligned, and then trying to figure out a way to get the sales teams to co-sell. That fragmentation and ad hoc nature is unfortunate, sometimes necessary, but in an ideal frame, the product and ecosystem or product and partner lead are working together to start at the alignment at the product level. And that becomes sort of like a way to create that cascade effect so that you don't end up with this. The ecosystem and product alignment being critical. The ideal is to be over here in this blue land, right? Where the product team is planning and resourcing between the product and the ecosystem at the start. No more product roadmaps on their own in the yellow that don't consider the needs of the ecosystem, but the resources and the planning happen in a balanced and coordinated method between the product investments and the ecosystem investments. That then leads to a marketing process where instead of having product solutions that are sort of like shoehorned in with ecosystems, there actually are end-to-end solutions. Content is created, demand generation is produced for products and ecosystems. So, the example being in a particular ICP and a particular use case, these products and these ecosystem members form an end-to-end solution. And that is the solution that marketing develops, builds content for, and drives demand around. And then, no surprise, if that happens, sales is then enabled on that joint solution. So right now, sales enablement is really hard in this yellow place because the partnership leaders have to run around and try to squirt ecosystem juice into the enablement process, which has not been open to receive it. But when products and ecosystems are designed together as end-to-end solutions, it becomes a natural first order principle that all of the enablement will include the ecosystem. And then, of course, incentives are built around products and sales plans and sales plays that are built around the products. So it becomes a natural process to drive partner assist. Customer success that has to drive value realization because we promise the customer this end-to-end solution. Ecosystem solutions have to be part of it. And of course, the financial performance gets centered around the synergies between the product and the ecosystem. So this is a nirvana over here on Blue Land. Only very mature go-to ecosystem companies have all of this. But if you're a product leader, you can see the value in doing this at the first row. because once it's at the first row, all the downward motion of the product release and everything that happens in the line of business is organic, natural, seamless, and doesn't require the shoehorning of partners into the mix. So I'm really interested in Pandium's take on this because you work a lot with product teams. You probably see this cascade effect of when you get it at the product level, how the downstream lines of businesses just start to perform organically and naturally. What's been your experience as you've seen this orange, yellow to blue kind of movement?
Yeah, I definitely think, we have a lot of customers where we sort of watched this implementation on the product side, and we've definitely seen sort of the beginning of the engagement where partnerships was really thwarted. There was tons of technology partnerships that they wanted to happen, but they didn't have the product or engineering resources to make it happen. It was kind of tacked on. It wasn't a good integration. There wasn't enough integrations. And then once we've seen products get on board and really make that happen, where you not only have more integrations, but good integrations, better interoperability, you're enabling partners to build into you, then we've seen like large expansion, and not only in partnerships, but in marketing and sales, where they're able to take that core experience that the customer is enjoying and leverage it for this kind of co-marketing, but also selling more solutions. And it really is, a flywheel that you can see go into place. But 100% agree, if the product is not there, you're kind of selling snake oil, right? Like as marketing, you don't want to be driving. You may be ecosystem minded, but you don't want to be driving people to a crappy integration, because ultimately that's going to be a bad customer experience. So I don't know if Cristina, you have things to add, but that's definitely what we've seen. Sort of product putting this into place really allows an exponential growth on the partnership side.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about this a lot in some of the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance panels around like getting internal alignment. And I think having product on board is definitely super important, but a good way to get there, I think, is to really celebrate the wins of some of these things. So like an integration is, if it's done right, essentially a new feature for both companies that are involved. And because partnerships and integration touches so many parts of the organization, if this is done correctly, there'll be a lot of celebration throughout the org. So the companies that we work with that we've seen really like nail that transition from the yellow here to the blue have done that, right? Like when they have a new partner, when they launch a new app, they really celebrate it. They celebrate it internally. They celebrate it, in marketing and social. And I think that really gets the kind of buzz going and can help, obviously, salespeople get excited, but really leverage that to the executive team because the entire company is feeling excited about it and wants to be able to continue to have those wins.
Brilliant, brilliant, excellent. Okay, good. Well, I want to introduce the 3 phases of product maturity as it relates to this model, and then we'll take a couple questions before we get into the how do you pull all this off? Because so far I've been talking very high level, strategic, and I'm sure everyone in the audience is going, okay, steps, give me the steps. What do I do? But it's important to kind of put yourself on one of these curves of maturity. So phase 1 maturity, we do not have ecosystem roadmaps. And if we have partner integrations, there's a limited line of business alignment. In other words, we don't really have a way in which a partner organization can easily cascade something from product to marketing to sales, and everything's sort of very ad hoc engagements across how to pull that off. So that's phase 1. On phase 2, we're kind of halfway there. We have actually got product and ecosystem integrations unified with some aspect of LOB participation, which means, for example, like we actually do have joint solutions, end-to-end solutions, but maybe the sales organization is still low on partner assist, or customer success is not necessarily driving all the integrations in that will create all the churn advantages that we know exist. And finally, in phase 3, we've actually matured the product and ecosystem roadmaps. They're fully instantiated into the way we do planning and resourcing. And we have end-to-end solutions so that we're no longer in this product sells this, ecosystems over here. They're operating in separate swim lanes. They're just, if they're in separate swim lanes, they're right next to each other. And oftentimes you take that little swim lane buoy thing out and they actually swim commonly in the pool. So those are the phases. And it's kind of important, I think, to recognize that when we talk about the concept of product and ecosystem roadmap, we really think of it as being part of a maturity journey. You don't just like put it, the roadmap's done. It's really more like a a series of going from ad hoc integrations with very little visibility to the underlying dynamics of how that monetizes to full instantiation and maturity. And so we're going to be seeing, we're developing a much more comprehensive assessment and maturity model that will help to guide companies to figure out where they are. But it's kind of important, particularly for partnership leaders, to kind of know where the product organization is on its maturity, because you don't get to step 6 if you're at step 3. You go from 3 to 4. And that's really important. Otherwise, you lose credibility immediately, because if you're at 3, step 6 is completely a step too far to take. Okay, well, maybe we should take a couple questions real quick on the big picture. I was excited to see some commentary in the chat. So Sunil mentions that, you know, we have a function in my organization that's responsible for feeding in feature requests into our product roadmap, and we call it the partner product management. So it's neat that that's almost sounds a bit like a competency, the competency of understanding how to recognize features, how to recognize them, which ecosystem member they come from, and how to begin to work with that. And then I saw, Christopher, you asked a question that the product and ecosystem roadmap implies an ability to rationalize roadmaps across partners via an ecosystem PLC, I guess this product lifecycle process. Is there a lighthouse example where this is working well today? That'd be a good one to take. I have one, but I'd love Cristina and Kelly, because you do this every day. Good examples of companies that have gotten that yellow to blue thing, or the product ecosystem roadmap, sort of that the audience could benefit from checking out.
Yeah, I think a company that's done this really well is ActiveCampaign. They sort of invested in this early, and I think that their founders believed in this from the start, just as a matter of principle, and they really sort of built out that functionality. They created platform features where people can build extensions on them. If they don't want to build a direct integration, they're going to host themselves. So I think it's really sort of throughout their organizations been implemented well.
Yeah, and I'll say any company that operates in e-commerce, like the modern supply chain, so I wouldn't look at like old school ERPs, but e-com just has a really robust concept of and mature concept of ecosystem, and there's so many point solutions. So like a returns management system is only useful if it is getting orders, and a logistics company is only useful if it is receiving orders. So for these tools to actually function, they need to have all of these integrations. So really any of the large players, obviously you can look at something like a Shopify, but they're massive. But if you go into those app stores and, you know, sort by any category and the top rated, I guarantee you'll be able to see companies that have done this really, really well and have operationalized it and built it like into their DNA.
Yeah, I would add that any company that has fully instantiated their ecosystem platform strategy is almost by definition doing this, because as you start to recognize platform versus product features, you come to this inexorable conclusion, which is, how cool is it if the product development is happening on someone else's balance sheet? It's like if you have a platform on which you're going to monetize product features that are built by somebody else, every time your platform is we have the best ROI in the world. I mentioned the IDC quote that said, you know, 25% of all app dev will take place in the ecosystem by I think it's 2025 or 26, I don't recall. But this is basically speaking to the idea that the companies that are crushing go to ecosystem are the ones who recognize that as soon as that roadmap calls out the role a partner plays, and the partner is spending the money to do the development, your ROI goes through the roof, which is particularly helpful in impending recessions and things like that. So lots of good examples. But without further ado, let's get into the how. So the first how piece is something that we call the product and ecosystem planning framework, and it's really all about aligning these boxes on the right. So before anybody's going to put an ecosystem into a product roadmap, they have to answer a couple of questions, like, how do we make money with this, right? Who's going to sell it, where and how and when? And is there someone in the partner organization who's actually programmatically delivering this? Because all of these things have to be in place. So one of the reasons we continue to reiterate why the top of the hill is with product is because if product does the job properly, and does its business planning to understand how those roadmap additions are going to get monetized, sold, and programmatically managed, then the whole system works properly. And that's why this is very much of a planning framework, not an execution framework, which begins with assessing the product team's ecosystem readiness. I had those phases I talked about before. Conducting some alignment sessions that really understand where the product team is in its evolution and how we can begin to insert these notions of monetization and go to market into the frame of how that's going to work. And then building these roadmaps in such a way that we can begin to say, okay, if we include the ecosystem 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 partnered companies in our roadmap, these are the expectations of what they're going to do, what we're going to do, and now we know how that's going to ultimately plan out over the next couple of years. So we strongly encourage anybody that's interested in this, give us drop me a DM and I can help you understand how this works. But this is the process that we're taking a number of companies through, and it's proving very useful, especially as companies recognize that it becomes a critical stage of moving from one phase to the other. Any comments on that one, Kelly or Cristina, relative to the planning process that precedes some of the stuff that you're going to talk about next, which is some of the tactics?
I think I'll kick it over to Kelly.
No, I think this is a good strategic high-level way to think about the synergies between these different sort of core functions and sort of metrics and how they need to feed back into each other with these different feedback loops. And I think we're going to talk in the next slides about tactically how you can sort of get this going.
Speaking of which, over to you guys.
Thanks. So this is sort of a more practical flywheel about how you would implement this in your organization, sort of taking the strategy framework that Allan laid out and saying, how do you actually get this going within your organization? And, I think these 6 elements are really key to implement no matter what stage your company is, whether you're an early stage company going to market or whether you're a late stage platform and you already have a large ecosystem, you still need to be doing these 6 things. And I think you really need to be doing them in an ongoing method. Like, they are not something that you can just do once and then put it on the shelf. It just needs to be sort of, as Cristina said, embedded into the DNA of your organization, that these things are ongoing. And I think the first thing is to really understand your customer's tech stack. So traditionally, product departments were just kind of focused on customer and prospect reaction to the product, A/B test different features, sort of what the reaction is to your product. Are they satisfied? What are the pain points? But in this ecosystem model, you really have to take a step back and understand all the systems that your customers are using. And not only what systems are they using, and this is going to be different based on different customer groups, but what are their pain points? What are they loving? What isn't working? And once you get that picture, you can really understand where your product is going to fit in. And that's really key to leveraging ecosystem. If you don't know where your product fits in for your customer, you're not going to be able to leverage this. And I think if you're at an earlier stage company and you're newer to this, there's tools like BuiltWith and Clearbit where you can really get a lot of data now on what your customers are using. And I would definitely do the customer and prospect research, but also use those tools to get a more market-wide research and see what they're deploying. Once you have that, I think you need to really look at these partner data models. So depending on how mature the spaces that you're in, the partner data models may be more unified. So for example, CRM data models are very mature. So no matter what CRM you're talking about, you're going to have things like contacts, companies, deals, forms. It's very standardized. If you are going to play into this space, you do not want to create a whole new model. You don't want to put any friction between you and the other tools that your customers are using. So understand the partner data models, and unless there's a very good reason, try to adopt them not only in your APIs, but in your product. That's going to make it easier for partner developers, third-party developers to work for you and to build into your products. Otherwise, you're just creating a lot of friction and developers aren't going to want to work with your product. And this kind of ties into making your product interoperable. So in order to leverage these ecosystems, you really need to have a product that is interoperable with all those other tools in your customer tech stack. And part of that is making sure that you are using similar data models. But it's more than that. If you're a platform, you're going to want to build the capacity for partners to build extensions, to build plugins. You're going to want to host that experience. You're going to want to be able to create sandboxes. You're going to manage authentication and permissions. That's all like a technical infrastructure that you need to put in place. And that's true regardless of whether you want to be a point solution, best in breed, or if you want to be the platform. So if you want to be the best in breed, you're going to want to think more about these data models and how it is easy for you to plug into these other platforms. And another example is in modern SaaS, like the most common API style by far is REST. So there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of developers who know how to work with a REST API. Don't deviate from that unless you have a good reason to. If there's a good reason to use a different style, then go ahead. But if there's not, use a style that developers are already familiar with, and you're reducing friction. And that's why Apple App Store is able to go gangbusters, is because there's hundreds of thousands of developers who already know how to work with iOS. We have the same thing here. There's hundreds of thousands of developers who know how to work with a REST API. So use that if you can. And there's other features, but that's something that you need to think about from day one. Partner commercials. So business models when it comes to technology partnerships are not established. They are kind of all over the place. And I think you have, you saw Google Cloud Platform recently cut their revenue share from 20% to 3%. Shopify recently removed it on the first 1 million for partners. So I think as a market, these business models are evolving, but as an organization, what you want to do is constantly be verifying that the partner commercials work for your organization, and they're also working for the partners that you want to have. Because partners may accept terms if they feel like they have to, but then they're going to be looking for reasons to leave. And if a competitor comes along and offers better terms, they're going to look for the chance to invest in that relationship and leave your relationship or not invest in it. So I think you want to be constantly assessing that the partner commercials work both for you, but also for the partners that you want to invest in your system. Next, you want to collaborate on roadmap, which we kind of covered, and I appreciate someone in the chat. For the long tail of partners, I think they put a great idea, which is that inside a partner portal, if you don't want to make it public, inside a partner portal, you want to have your product roadmap. You want to have your API roadmap. You want those long tail partners to get visibility and see what you're doing. So share as much of that as you can, and then provide a mechanism for partners to request product features, put their reason why, and have someone on your team who is analyzing that long tail feedback and not only responding as part of partner relations, but also synthesizing that data and passing it to your product team. And when it comes to the more strategic partners, you want to have those regular meetings. You want to ensure that your product leadership is meeting with their product leadership, and you're ensuring that your products are growing in alignment. Because not only is your customer tech stack getting hundreds of new products a year potentially as SaaS continues to explode, all the other products they're using are continuing to add new functionality, new APIs. And if your product starts to grow off in a different direction, it's going to be cease to be useful to your customer. And that's why you need to have processes in place for your product team and partner product teams to be regularly collaborating, ensuring that you're not making redundant functionality and that your integrations are continuing to work. And it doesn't mean that they have to break to cease to be useful. And I think putting into place these collaborations ensure that they continue to be valuable to your shared customer. And then finally, driving adoption. It's not enough to create this interoperability. You then have to make sure that customers are not only aware of it, but they're also able to successfully leverage it. So that's sort of a joint between product marketing, partner marketing, custom marketing, and customer support. All those functions can really ensure that customers are aware of the integrations available, aware of how it's interoperable, and then also enabled to use that successfully. So I think that's kind of the high level flywheel of things that you need to put into place, both initially and then as you scale. So these components might look differently as you grow larger in terms of process and the way that you're enabling these functions, but they still need to exist. And then I think, I don't know, Alan, if you had thoughts on this high level, or Christina.
Yeah, the only thing I would just say is just if you're looking for how to break the tie with the customer. Because if you actually ask the customer what they want, they're going to tell you very well integrated solutions. Your solution talks to the other important solutions. And I think any product organization that doesn't have their finger on the pulse of the customer's request for end-to-end solutions is missing the boat. And your whole framework is all built on that premise that we understand the customer requirements and we're building to meet their needs. And to my mind, that's the biggest reason why the ecosystem is so critical for products, because you simply can't do it the old-fashioned way. If you do, not only will it be inefficient, it will ultimately undermine your goals, and it will end up being more expensive because all those integrations that you built in an ad hoc way have to be maintained. And then you've got these free radicals running around in your business that are just going to kill you. Okay, good.
Love it.
Awesome. So next we talk a little bit about how go-to-ecosystem and product creates some implementation requirements. So Cristina, how do you see that from the standpoint of like the way you approach APIs and integrations?
Yeah, so Kelly covered some of these things, but we can get a little bit deeper here. So kind of table stakes, if you're going to have interoperability and tech partnerships, is having an ecosystem friendly and well-documented API. So as Kelly said, there are well-worn paths with frameworks that many engineers have already used. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel, just use REST. Now we've got GraphQL, there's all kinds of options, but going with something that is generally acceptable or accepted rather versus trying to create something new is definitely the way to go if you want people to build into your API. I'll also say the same thing applies for authentication. So if you are building your API for the first time and you need to implement auth, there's a lot of well-documented solutions that you can use instead of doing like a homegrown roll your own kind of thing. Obviously, everyone wants to be secure, but the more complexity that you add to this, the less likely your partners are going to want to build into you and spend the time to learn things that they might consider to be esoteric or special just to you. Lastly on that, the only thing worse than an undocumented API is a poorly or incorrectly documented API. So really baking into the product and engineering sort of muscle that when you release a new feature, if it's API enabled, the docs have to be updated. I think integrations are littered with errors that are a result of an API not functioning the way it was documented, or customers having requirements that were not implemented because it was unknown how those APIs function. So sounds really table stakes, but when companies are beginning to really grow rapidly, a lot of these things sort of fall by the wayside until it comes apart at the seams. Alan, as you said, chaos agents within your org. And we covered this as well, joint planning with partner, product, and API teams. When you first start to open up your API to the outside world, your first few partners are actually sort of doing QA for you. So being able to get their feedback rapidly, I think, is a really valuable thing as you continue your ecosystem. So I would say a few things. When you're getting started with this, definitely hand select the partners that you're going to work with. Make sure that they're folks that you think obviously are well bought in, but you also have a good relationship with. So when they do start to hit some of those edge cases, or they have questions, maybe you have a joint Slack channel, maybe it's like every 2-week check-in, something like that, because that can really inform your developer experience and roadmap. I'll also say, if those of you have seen me in other panels, I talk about this a lot. I'm a big fan of forward deployed engineers within organizations. So you actually have an engineer within your own organization that is building against your public API in the same way that your partners would. And that person can be a valued resource to bring struggles or challenges, update docs back to your product team without relying on an external source to do that for you. And then joint visibility into usage and satisfaction. So again, I think Allan, you've lived this life, as have we, where you have partners building into you. Maybe you're building some stuff. It's like running all over the place, but no one really knows exactly like who's installed what. If they're uninstalling it, are they using it? And the ability to track that is going to be really important as you build your partner program. So there's a bunch of different technical ways to implement that. Everything from having client IDs and things like that to provision, all the way down to just having some shared infrastructure. But the ability to tell who's installing what, how often they're installing it, what they're doing with it, and whether or not they like it is really helpful, because we find, especially in the beta sort of SMB space, a lot of small businesses have a ton of options, and they'll just turn it off and churn off of somebody, and they won't tell you why. So being able to be proactive in that way, I think is really useful and will help your partners as well. I don't know, Kel, if you've got anything to add there.
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations don't put in the technical infrastructure to surface the integration usage and satisfaction. So they don't know what's going on, and you end up with a lot of wasted resources, right? Like somebody built that integration, somebody invested in it, and they don't even realize it's either not being adopted or it's being adopted and then people are uninstalling because it's not working. So finding the technical infrastructure that can enable both you and your partner to share visibility on that, so you can have those conversations, you can share those insights, and then whoever built the integration can update it and sort of support it in a way that's benefiting the customer is really a key part of getting return on those investments that you're putting into any integration. I think back in the day, people thought any integration works. Like if you connect to Salesforce, it's good enough, but buyers have kind of moved past that at this point, and they're starting to say, okay, you connect to Salesforce, but can I actually update the information in Salesforce? Can I see it in Salesforce? What exactly are you enabling? And I think that SaaS companies need to sort of develop both the processes and collaboration, but also the technical side to make sure that they're meeting those needs and not just saying, hey, we connect to 1,000 systems, but it's a one-way data flow.
Yeah,
Right.
agreed. And your customers best. You should know what they want to do with this in their tech stack. And if you don't, then as a product person, that's part of the job. So, sorry, Allan, I think I cut you off.
No. I was just going to say, it's just move on, because you have some wonderful. What does this mean to the business? That just as a transition between those, I think we're at the time right now where most product organizations are moving from what I'll call ecosystem reactive to ecosystem competent. And it's that movement into competency that starts to move the planning and decision-making frameworks up to the advanced visibility perspective, rather than everything being reactive. And ultimately, we want to get to ecosystem mastery. But first, we have to get competent, so that everything, like you're talking about, utilization of ecosystems. Well, go ask customer success. It's like, okay, well, they might know, but they may don't have a dashboard. And then we're just guessing. And to move from reactive to competent, we have to stop guessing and start planning and start actually having proactive data about where things are in the ecosystem, starting at product. And then we get good at this. And then these things like that you have here start to happen organically, rather than by shoehorning them in, is what we have to do today. So, but I think we got some great stuff in terms of like how product organizations, as they move to competent, can actually start delivering KPIs to the business. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see some of these here. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the data and having that data. And because integration historically has been sort of like the cast off of a product org, it in my experience at least, it's something that is not well tracked, not as well tracked as a new product feature or something of that nature. So really at the very beginning, building that foundation where you can track like churn reduction and ACV. And the way that you're able to track that is by knowing who's installing things and what they're installing and what they're using. With that as well, I know a lot of folks will query feedback from their partners, like, hey, we built this app, like, what are your customers saying? That's a little bit of a softer metric, but I think is getting customer support involved is really important in this. Giving product team ecosystem KPIs, depending on your level of maturity. That could be a lot of different things. It could be releasing a public API. It could be updating docs. It could be releasing features that customers and partners are asking for to make integrations better, or implementing some of this tracking that we're talking about. And then really making sure that you have collaboration with customer support and sales, and you're constantly getting feedback. We just recently, Cal, I can't remember who it was, but on one of the panels asked our panelists about how they handle getting that communication, and they really had like a structured way where, like, once a month they have a meeting with this group, and then they have another meeting with this group, and then they have a newsletter that goes out internally to really share what the ecosystem is doing and solicit that feedback. I'm a big fan of customer support. I think they're the ones that are going to have the most kind of honest opinion on things and be your biggest champions, because they really care about your customers. So making sure there's a very tight feedback loop with those groups will also help you succeed.
Brilliant. Awesome. Well, we have 5 minutes left, so love to get some questions. So maybe we could look through the chat really quickly and see which questions our esteemed panelists are going to take here. Here's a good question from Sunil. He asks, which team do you see most often taking the lead in managing the ecosystem product roadmap? The product organization, the partner BD organization, both, or other? So I'll start that one. I think in an ideal environment, the ecosystem leader or the ecosystem chief is working really closely with the chief product officer at the planning level, because when it's done at that level, then both of those core lines of business, the people responsible for the products and the people responsible for the partners, are aligning on what the opportunities lie. It's not uncommon to see products take a lead if the ecosystem chief is weak, or for the ecosystem chief to push on the product if the product team is weak. But in an ideal environment, you see that alignment between both organizations, so that whatever we do at the product level can be monetized and delivered from a value perspective and the partner organization, and vice versa. The worst case scenario is when it's happening all ad hoc, and at the end of the day, you're just trying to keep as many balls in the air, and you're going to inevitably be hit in the head when those balls fall, because you can't balance. You can't juggle a bunch of balls unless you got everybody juggling. That's a competency. But what do you guys think from the perspective of that who takes the lead question, Kelly and Cristina?
I think there's kind of two sides to that question, right? Like, one is the commercial goals of the business and the partnership team, assuming they roll into like BD or marketing. And then the other is, what features and functions do we need to get there? So the places that, companies that we work with that don't have like that ecosystem leader, like C-suite executive, it really is a collaboration, right? It's up to the leadership and partnerships to figure out the roadmap for the next like 6 months or year. These are the integrations we really want to build, and then to collaborate with product to figure out, hey, are there changes that need to be made to allow us to either have that partner build into us, or for us to build that integration? And if so, how should we prioritize those? So I think working really closely hand in hand is the ideal scenario. It doesn't always work out that way, but I think that's if the entire organization is aligned from the executive team down that this is a priority, folks can make it happen.
Brilliant. Okay. There's another question. What's the best way to handle communication? This is from Sonal. What's the best way to handle communicating incremental API updates or changes and version changes with the ecosystem partner? How do we sort of communicate about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that companies do that. I think having a newsletter, most importantly, a developer newsletter, a blog, you really want it to be omni-channel, because developers often are not going to be super engaged necessarily. You want to hit that long tail. One of the more interesting things I've seen done is having it communicated within the API. So when they make an API call through their integration, they receive a notice that it's going to be changed, especially if it affects something that they just made a call to. So for developers, I think that's a really good way to make sure that they're notified that changes are coming. But I think the newsletter, posting it on social media, if you have a developer community, usually developer forums for ecosystem at this point are dead. I think as we move forward, we're going to see more active developer communities around ecosystem, but right now they're not very active. So email, having a page dedicated to this where they can subscribe to it in multiple forums is a good way as well. But I really just emphasize that it should be omni-channel. So that way you make sure the whole long tail of partners gets that information, especially if it's a breaking change.
Oh, definitely if
Great.
it's a breaking change, everybody needs to know. But I'll say if it's something incremental, meaning like just a handful of partners have asked for something. Operationally, what a lot of companies do is they'll like tag those features in some way in their ticketing system. Like, hey, these are like the 15 partners that we know really want this. So when that thing is released, the product team can go to the partner managers and say, hey, we're going to announce this in our newsletter, but I know that you have these 3 partners who are really asking for it. You should reach out to them and let them know that this is ready. Again, they also are sort of doing a little bit of smoke testing for you then too, and you can kind of keep like a tight handle on any feedback.
Great. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so I want to thank everyone for participating. If anyone would like to get a hold of me, feel free to DM me over LinkedIn. And how about Kelly and Cristina? How best for people to get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with anyone and engage in conversations about this.
Same.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. And Cristina and Kelly, it was a pleasure to be with you this morning, afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks
See
for
you
everyone
soon.
coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.